World of global supply chain, covering topics such as automation, innovation, unique identity, and more. I'm your co-host, Reed.
And I'm Liz.
And welcome to the show. Hello, everyone. Are you familiar with FSMA 204 or the Food Safety Modernization Act? Well, if you're not, then you've landed at the right place. Today, we're talking with Karen Long and Joan Studley from iFoodDS. iFoodDS is a software solution provider that works with produce companies to help them manage the extensive data requirements for their food safety programs. Now, FSMA 204, or the Food Safety Modernization Act, is coming your way if you're dealing with food in any way, shape, or form. And so in today's episode, Karen and Joan share some best practices and some obstacles to avoid. They talk about finding an expert and a friend to work with, getting involved with work groups, and the value of collaboration. They talk about a networked, focused approach and the importance of not only talking with folks internally, but also externally, because everyone might interpret things a little bit differently, and it's important to have those conversations now so that you can hit the ground running when FSMA 204 goes into full effect within 3 years. I hope you enjoy this episode. I certainly did.
Karen, Joan, we are so excited to have you on the show today.
Yeah, we're really excited to be here. Thank you so much for having both of us.
Excellent. Well, before we really dive into the FSMA aspects of this conversation and everything, can you both, maybe we'll start with you, Karen, and then go to you, Joan. Just tell us a little bit about your roles with iFoodDS and a little background on the company and, what brought you to iFoodDS.
Yeah, sure. I'll go first. So I've spent most of my career working to support digital transformation efforts in several various industries. And I really started with this passion in college when I went to work for Penn State University to help develop an e-learning curriculum. It's just after the internet was invented. Dating myself a little bit. But when I graduated, I continued that focus on the challenge of really working in several different industries to move giant rocks that would allow that industry to move faster. I started in automotive. I spent a little bit of time in medical. Most recently, I had a bout with conversational AI, which is just fascinating to see how quickly it can move. But my first role back in automotive was with a startup company where I was working with the exact same leadership who's here now at iFoodDS, along with several longtime vets from the fresh food supply chain industry. And we've been really tackling this massive project of enabling fresh food supply chain to glean all the benefits that comes with the data that's made available through that transformation. So kind of came full circle, and I'm back with some of the best in the business. So
awesome. Thank you so much, Joan.
So I joined iFoodDS back in May of 2021. And I've been in product management for many, many years, working at a lot of different technology companies. So while the food industry and the supply chain is new to me, I have a lot of experience that I'm bringing in the product management side and solving big problems. And what particularly is kind of a linear correlation between my jobs is data. I love working with data. I love the abilities you can take data to help make business decisions or even collaborate. So with something like Rule 204, the collaboration piece is huge and the data sharing and capturing is huge. So I'm really excited to have joined iFoodDS in the midst of all of this going on and being part of helping solve it.
That's awesome.
That is exciting. We're gonna get into that, and maybe if you could just take just a quick second, a little elevator pitch for those that are listening that don't know anything about iFoodDS. Maybe just a high level, what the company does.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll jump in. So iFoodDS really evolved from a SaaS software provider that was providing data capture solutions primarily for fresh food growers, harvesters, packers, and coolers. And through the acquisition of HarvestMark in 2020, we began to expand that focus into providing SaaS software for data capture, for kind of middle and lower down funnel in the supply chain for retailers to capture quality data, information about product as it moved into distribution centers and onto stores. So this really enables our company, as Joan was mentioning, connecting all these data pieces together and collaborating with every single member of the supply chain, whether you're growing the product or you're selling the product, cooling the product in the middle, to share data via our platform that we then can connect together on the back end to get a holistic view of the product as it moves from end to end in the supply chain. I don't know, Joan, if you have anything to add.
No, you always do such a great job being on the sales team, Karen.
Really complex stuff that we're into right now with the way we manage that data, but it's a pretty straightforward using SaaS software applications that we provide. I'll just add that we've also pivoted recently with the 204 initiative to begin to ingest data from other sources, third-party data sources as well, which really opens the door broadly to this data, building data models, because now we can not just use the data if you're using our app, but if you're using a different application, we can ingest that data and provide tremendous amount of insight and build some predictive capabilities into our analytics platform. Pretty cool stuff.
It sounds really cool.
Thank you for that.
It sounds really cool, and it's solving business problems that folks are having today. And when we start talking about FSMA, or the Food Safety Modernization Act, for those who don't say it over and over every day, right? 204. The rule is here. It was finalized November, I think, 15th of last year, probably right around then. But from your perspective, I mean, it's huge. It's huge. It's impacting a lot of different players in the supply chain, many of whom you just mentioned, from the growers all the way to retailers or restaurants. What does it mean for the businesses and the supply chain partners? How do they react to that? From your perspective, what does that mean?
Yeah, maybe I'll start by just even talking about us, iFoodDS, as a service provider. What does that mean for us? And maybe we can start there in terms of what Rule 204 provides for service providers is clarity and alignment, and just how we're able to partner and support our customers and the whole food supply chain. So by having this clarity of what needs to be captured, how it needs to be captured, how it needs to be shared, really helps us as a service provider even further assist our customers and the supply chain in, the work that they do every day. Having things like what needs to be captured in those key data elements and at those critical tracking events, what those are and what needs to be captured at each of those really helps us to provide solutions that align with standards. I know we're going to talk a bit more about standards. And then also it helps us in terms of solving and providing solutions that are easy to use and hopefully cost effective, because this can be a cost for many folks that are going to have to comply with this. And so we're excited to be taking on that challenge of here's Rule 204. It gives us some really good clarity and alignment of what needs to be done. And as a solution provider, we like that because it helps us then be able to standardize our solutions and help, many of the players, if not all of the players in the food supply chain.
Yeah, and I've heard the same thing. Many solution providers like iFood are taking the same approach. They're trying to figure out ways that this provides clarity for the whole supply chain. But from the perspective of what does the supply chain partners need to do now that the rule is here, not just, because we talk from the vendor perspective, but I'm out every day talking to all of the various members of our supply chain. Get ready. I mean, don't wait. This 204, this regulatory, that it's final now, it's a marathon. And I know Joan's a competitive cyclist. She trains all the time, and she waited until right before her race to start training. Joan, what would happen, right? This thing is going to require a lot of preparation. And I was initially I thought, oh gosh, they went from 2 years to 3 years. But now, as we look at it and think of it, and we've been tearing it apart every second of the 3 years. I actually was with somebody last week at the Fresh Forward Leadership Conference with FMI, and this retailer said, yeah, we have 35 and a half months. And I thought, wow, you started that countdown, but that really is. So for suppliers, I think now that it's here, let's go. I mean, we really got to, and it doesn't mean let's go start buying up solutions. It means start planning now. There's a lot to do.
Karen, I loved your analogy there about, Jones cycling, and I want to get into that maybe, after the episode here that we record. But funny enough, this morning, I always kind of like, you're looking at Instagram and different things, and I'm always looking for quotes to clip, and I share them with my kids and kids I coach and stuff. And I saw one this morning, and you just nailed it. Champions do not become champions when they win the event, but in the hours, weeks, months, and years they spend preparing for it. And that's exactly what you just summed up. And so my question was about collaboration, right? We're all big, and like that's why we're doing this podcast, to share information and knowledge. But from your points of view, from the both of you, what are some of the challenges that you see in terms of collaborating, getting folks to talk about it within the supply chain partners and ecosystem? Are there some big, blind spots that maybe folks aren't aware of, or is there some secrets to the way we should collaborate that you want to share? I mean, anything that you can share, I think the audience would benefit from.
Yeah, the collaboration component of this is essential. It's actually, collaboration is baked into this rule, really primarily for the first time in FSMA rule. I mean, the word collaboration, it is the most critical component. We all have to share information. So when you think about in the rule, as we look at the rule, it's the harvester or the cooler that's keeping these records and through the processes of what they do. They actually now have to physically share those records from that harvesting or cooling CTE on with the packer. There's been no other FSMA rule, including Bioterrorism 2002, that has required the collaboration. It's always been implied, right? So I think that's probably one of our biggest challenges, is that we're moving from an area where previously it was an implication of collaboration, and now it's a requirement of collaboration. So as I look at, how this has progressed over time, FSMA 204 requires it, and the closest federal regulation that had been passed close to that might be FSBP. So I would probably encourage our partners to get in touch with their teams that executed the FSBP requirement to collaborate and share information, and tap on those teams and say, how did you do it? How are you currently still doing it? How are you, because it's, while it's a challenge, it has been done before, and it has been done with a regulatory requirement to do so. So FSBP would probably be the way I'd point people to say, start thinking about it in that same frame of mind.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and what I might add to that is we're not alone, right, in this. I mean, collaboration means we're all working together on it. And so as a service provider, we're here to help, right? And we're like combing through, the rule itself. We're participating in working groups, we're reaching out, we're talking to our customers and potential customers, because we understand collaboration is a huge piece of it. And, we like to partner, we like to collaborate with others in solving and resolving and, figuring out how we're going to help on the implementation of Rule 204, with collaboration as the central, focus for us to be able to help everybody in the supply chain, in getting this implemented.
I don't think anybody's going to be able to solve it on their own.
No,
right?
No.
Yeah.
And
those are some great examples.
Oh yeah, I'll just add quickly. I think that as we look to collaborate, we've really got to reach out and extend beyond some of these webinars and the requirement and the, while these podcasts, webinars, blanket emails to everybody saying this is what you will do, that's not collaboration, that's coercion. If retailers start stepping in and saying, you must use this service, do it this way, send it to me in this form. I mean, we can't have everybody running off and creating standards. So I would encourage everyone to start the dialogue now as you're doing that training for the race, right? As an example, we have a tremendous partner at Associated Wholesale Grocers. They're a great example. They have these great industry events where they bring all of their suppliers in-house to sit and look at them in the eye and have these good conversations to open up the dialogue back and forth. Those kind of events. Can't leave out GS1 Connect that's coming up. It's a tremendous opportunity to connect with people. Yeah. And the fact that it's at the Gaylord, you can bring your friends for family and friends traceability. I just use these events to really connect and have a dialogue now before you put out the mandates and the webinars and the final say on how you're going to approach the rule.
I think there'll be an element too of best practices that hopefully folks will share with each other, because this isn't anything proprietary, right? It's business problems, it's critical tracking events, it's key data elements. Let's solve it together versus recreating, like you said, recreating standards or recreating the wheel. Somebody's doing this well. Let's share it with each other to move it all forward. So you kind of touched on this, Karen, but the steps to get your supply chain partners on board. So one of them obviously is getting involved in conversations. But what do you say to those who are like, we've got 3 years? Or, depending on when you talk to them, we've got 2 years. What do you say?
So, we've talked a little bit about it's a marathon. You got to get started. You've got 3 years. Looking at how long it took for you to implement other regulatory pushes like global gap requirement or the FSVP programs. We discussed some of those, but I think that as more conversations start to happen right now, those face-to-face conversations, those vendor interactions, the member interactions, you really can get a pulse, because as I talk to retail operations, I see they know exactly what's happening in their operation. But as they talk to the suppliers, I think there's a lot of assumptions of preparedness.
Yes.
It can't be that hard. All they have to do is send me a file. It shouldn't be that hard. They must be keeping track. And most of them are keeping track. But nobody thought of what the standard of the transmission would be and normalization of the data. And can you ingest? A lot of the folks thinking about these don't necessarily always think about some of the hurdles that come into play when you think about all the work that has to be done to harmonize data so that it can be shared seamlessly between 2 different, let alone 4 or 5 or 6 or 7 different partners. So again, I'll reinforce that I think get in front of the conversation early, not just internally. Reach out, start having conversation with your external partners, vendors, suppliers, anybody who is touching the product that inevitably will be sold off a retail shelf, and try to identify or go on site visits, see what's actually happening in your distribution centers, see what the product looks like, and that whole workflow. I think it would be eye-opening for a lot of people to understand where the gaps exist today.
Yeah, what I would follow on with Karen is I call this a network-focused approach, meaning that approach this in a way that's suitable and achievable. Like if you have a supplier network, looking at that as a whole. How do you partner with your supplier network to help capture and share these required traceability data, right? And putting together and having this comprehensive and holistic approach that aligns with Rule 204 requirements is just going to help you in how you focus in the collaboration with your supplier network. So it's really looking at that full picture, your full network, and figuring out how you partner and work with them so that you get what you need in terms of capturing and sharing, and you're working together, collaborating on it.
I love the information you're sharing. And for some folks listening, you may think that this is rather, that's kind of obvious. We should reach out and talk. But we're talking about 3.5 years, or what was it, 35.5 months. You mentioned, Karen, that one of your folks said, but these are the tipping points for companies that are going to thrive and stretch out and accelerate above and beyond because they have process, procedures, communication, solutions in place, tested, anticipating, doing all those things, trying, communicating. And then there's going to be the laggards that are like, oh, no, this is done. We don't know what's going to happen in 3 years. Our margin's going to be tighter. Our delay's going to be longer. Supply chain constraints. New rules that are going to pop up for whatever reason, global impact and these types of things. But these are those that prepare now. The message is prepare now, test now, collaborate now, network now, so that you can really accelerate and extend. I'm sure, Joan, thinking of your cycling, because I used to do that, although I just put up my road bike for sale because I'm kind of done with those days. But when you're prepared and the pack takes a run, you run with them. When you're not prepared, as they say, Phil Liggett from the
Yes.
Tour de France will say, "Oh, he's falling off the wheel."
Fall off the back.
Yeah, exactly. You fall off the back pretty far. Um, there's so much we could talk about today. We don't have all the time in the world, but I want to keep moving along. And I think I kind of know the answer to this, and I have my opinions, but I'd really love to get your opinions on why it's so important for the industry to have standards, right? And how do standards allow for better visibility and traceability? I'd love your opinions on that.
Yeah, when I think about that, I think about it as how having standards lowers cost and how it helps for easier implementations. Remember, I'm a product manager, so I think a lot about customer pain points and how to ease those and how to solve those with the customer. So when I think about having standards, it really does help us to focus and know and follow those standards, and it is more cost effective when we have standards in place. And then it helps us to make it easier to implement when we know what those standards are. So having those agreed upon in the industry just really helps all of us, not only us as service providers here at iFoodDS, but it helps us help our customers. So the ease of knowing how to put something in place with those standards is just quicker and less expensive for everyone to do that.
So for sure, and I also look at standards today. We think about putting standards in place to solve a current problem that we have. But I also, in my past experience, as well as how I kind of see this rolling out, I think the standards that can be used almost as, I should say, preventative medicine. It's, prevention that will, keep some of the things from happening because we're following a standard. When we look at, what the FDA, in their last webinar has been talking about, as they look to build a specification on a standard for their sharing of the data, right? The sortable spreadsheet. And they're talking about, they've been very clear on this is what we're working on to not just have the standard as it's written in 204, but now how do we create standards to share data? They wrote about this and covered it extensively in the New Era Blueprint for Smarter Food Safety. I mean, they talked about this is the blueprint, this is the standard, this is how we're going to move forward. And so hopefully, these standards will serve as that preventative medicine in the future that says we have a standard, we're going to follow the standard, so we don't need more rules and regulations because we have a standard. It's the new era for food safety, the new era of following standards, right?
It also, Karen, reminds me of something that you said in one of the first questions when we're talking about critical tracking events and key data elements. If everybody's capturing those key data elements in the same way and that handshake, then you don't have to have a cross-reference table or all this other data that you don't need and can get wrong. It's just like the handshake is so much cleaner, whether it's a sortable spreadsheet or whatever's next, when you start thinking about sharing the data.
Yep. Lowers cost, keeps it cleaner, prevents accidents from happening in future, and prevents requirements for having to put more regulations in place later. Because we did it right the first time.
Yes. And then we can repeat it for other things that you may need, right? Different kinds of traceability, different kinds of data collections and things like that. When, I think we already kind of hit on it, but when you think about a business and you think about standards, where do you recommend that business start when implementing for FSMA? It's a little granular, not just talking internally, but how do you actually start this work?
Well, I would say immediately first, before you start building standards and adhering to standards or figuring out what they are, because I think we have a little bit of time. The industry kind of sorts out exactly how they want to capture, keep, store, and transmit this data. It's not going to happen this year, but the preparation, of course, as we talked about, would happen this year. And again, this is probably one of those, overstatements of the year. Read the rule. Literally, I talked to a ton of people and I said, have you read the rule? They said, I'm not reading it. It's 600 pages. But the actual codified part of the rule really isn't that long. The comments are used to help clarify a whole bunch in the rule, but you can sit down and you can get through the rule pretty quickly. Whether you're in the weeds or not, thinking about standards and technology and data sharing or not, you can read the rule and understand it. So I would say great place for businesses to start is have every stakeholder on the fringe read the rule. And then follow on to that quickly is find an expert and a friend very quickly that understands and can help interpret, right? Like, then it's not necessarily saying, oh, find iFood. It's saying find an expert, but an expert who understands whole supply chain traceability, not the expert that wants to interpret it or your lawyer that's interpreting it for your specific part in the supply chain, but somebody who gets the whole thing. That expert's critical, because reading the rule, you're going to very quickly go cross-eyed and say, yes, I need to find that expert.
Yeah, and I'll pile on that and just say, get involved, right? Working groups. So I've been participating in the GS1 FSMA Rule 204 working group since like mid last year. And it's been tremendously helpful for me in understanding the rule in those discussions and conversations, and also, understanding how GS1 standards come into play to assist in being able to implement this rule for the data capture and sharing. So go out there, find the working groups, find webinars, workshops. Discussion is huge. I mean, reading is great, but discussions are what can really bring to light like questions we have to answer those questions. Even if you're having discussions internally with your teams, like the marketing team here at iFoodDS comes to me, or Karen comes to me, right? And like, what does this mean? Or how should we talk about this? And it really helps having those conversations to uncover, like, is this how it should be interpreted, or explaining to ourselves how how we're going to approach it. So internally and externally, get involved, have conversations. There's plenty of groups out there to help with that.
I'll tell you, I wasn't expecting you all to go there, but I wrote this down, like, read the rule. That's 101. But you know what? I've seen a ton of examples we could rattle off right now, from everyday stuff to, our kids doing homework assignments, to ourselves reading. Myself guilty right here. Read the whole email before you reply, because what you're asking is probably in the email in the next paragraph. That's very simple stuff. And I love that you brought it back. We talked about it earlier in the conversation, is the collaboration. Read the rule, ask opinions, ask experts, talk to your network about it. This is the time, right? This is the time to prepare these conversations and get ahead of it, because I'm one of 4 kids in the family, and I'm the youngest, and I see things completely different than the other 2. And the oldest one, I just listen to whatever she says. I don't even, that's gospel. Right? And the other 2 were just fighting about it. No, I think she said this, I think she said that. So very interesting. Well, thank you both for sharing that. Keeping with the pace here and keeping us on time, and we're doing a great job there. We're kind of getting towards the end here, but we've been talking a lot about food safety and FSMA 204 and the best practices and what's ahead of us. Can you share some examples of some disasters you've experienced or witnessed or seen or lived through where poor data exchange is kind of at the forefront of that? Because that's where we're heading into right now with this.
Oh, I'll let you start.
Yeah, I mean, I can just, name a couple. Like, we had a customer that was trying to get food safety data for their supplier network, just so they could have a holistic view of that. But their suppliers are using different food safety data, different audit schemes. So it's just made it really challenging, to the point of impossible, to capture this comprehensive view. So it's an example of like, hey, trying to do something that's going to be very beneficial of having, a supplier network food safety data together, but just in terms of, it was just all over the place, and being able to pull that set of data together. And another I can bring up to you is the harmonized label, right? And great example of like an idea for standardization, but what we find is that folks want variation, right? So harmonized label, everybody's going to do the same harmonized label for cases, right? But then all these variations start coming into play. And so, what do we do with that, right? In terms of like, do we customize, or do we force the standard on folks? So it's one of those things of like, we want to share data, but it's so hard because either the standards aren't there, or when there is a standard, people want to change it all of the time. So those are just some of the things that, like, again, as a service provider and we're trying to support our customers, and we run into like we want to help them and we're trying to adhere to standards, but standards may not always, allow the customization or the flexibility that folks are looking for.
I think some listeners will probably cringe, but they probably have had some of this experience as well. I'll just tell you a quick disaster story. As I've been going around to distribution centers and then individual retail stores trying to get a gauge on the gap, closing the gap on traceability preparedness, I'm looking at lots of cases and boxes, right? And seeing what labels are on the side, how are they labeled? And I was actually in a distribution center where I was examining the label, and then I looked at the box and I said, something doesn't seem right. So I opened up the box to see what was in the box. Sure enough, they were Gala apples in the box, but the label on the side said russet potatoes. Literally a
little different.
Yes, 128 barcode with a voice pick code and all of the details, and it wasn't even the same product, right? So it's kind of this connection. It's age old in supply chain. It's been their three-way match problem. What did I order? What did they ship me? What did they actually ship me? And then what did I get invoiced for? Requires a level of validation. So just because we're introducing in this regulation sharing of data elements, there's still going to continue to need to be that level of validation. And that's, where Joan and I have been focused on the products and services that we build, is to make sure that even though these disasters are happening, they can be caught through SaaS software product, through focus on workflows and everything to validate what I thought I was going to get, what I got, what I'm invoiced for, and build that into the flow to prevent these disasters from coming to fruition.
Yeah, it's a great example. They're always talking everything that I run into. Every other thing in my day lately is automate, right? Chat GPT, let's automate this, let's create these, what was the other one? I'm forgetting right now, but there's all these, no code development and all this stuff where we're all trying to do it. But we have to realize we need the standards, and it's not just GS1 standards, right? It's technology standards, it's communication standards, it's best practice standards, all these types of things, because it doesn't work. I mean, to your point, and huge costs. I'm paying for apples and I'm getting potatoes. That's not, I haven't had potato pie in a really long time, but apple pie, really good.
Apple pie is good. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. And not only is it important, Reed, to your point, it's not a one-time thing. Like, just because you've got this in place doesn't mean you need to go backwards. Don't need to go backwards and make sure your data is accurate and you've got the connections and this and this and this. It's like, this isn't one time and you're done. It's an ongoing.
Yeah. And Joan said it earlier, standards make it cheaper.
Yes.
We're going to print that up and put it on a t-shirt.
Yeah. I'm making that into a bumper sticker.
Yeah.
It's cheaper to do everything that we've talked about. It makes it cheaper to, when you talk about the validation, if you have a standard and you look at it the same way every time, it makes it easier to go through that validation process. So it's not just cheaper from this perspective of adhering to the standard, but to implement specific workflows operationally to check the standard. I mean, everything becomes way more cost effective when it's implemented that way.
Yep, absolutely.
Great stuff.
Yeah, this has been awesome. Reed and I, at the end of podcasts, ask two questions. So I'll tee up the first one. Joan, I'll start with you. What is your favorite technology right now? It can be something at work. It can be something at home. Just kind of what's out there that is really keeping you excited.
Yeah, I'll go back to my endurance athlete sports. So Garmin, Strava, Ride with GPS, Swift, all of those technologies that I use are huge in terms of knowing my performance, sharing rides with people. I mean, I have really bad direction. So using Ride with GPS, downloading into my Garmin Edge so it tells me where to turn so I don't get lost out. I mean, all of those are huge. And then you can share with other people. So I'm a huge proponent of sharing with others, so sharing my rides and then being able to track how I'm doing for my training. So all of those types of things are huge, and they just more and more keep coming out in terms of helping you understand as an athlete, how you're performing, if you need to take some rest time, all of those sort of things. And then letting others know where you're riding if they want to join you.
That's awesome. I can totally see Joan right now. Oh, look, there's Ann Jackson, and she's doing a lot better than I am right now. I'm going to have to get out there and work a little
You've got to
harder.
get going.
Don't do Peloton with her because she'd be checking out my ride. So
Exactly.
Only encouraging, Karen. Only encouraging.
I know, all the time. So I would say her name, but she'd probably chime in on the conversation because she's sitting behind me. My favorite technology, so we'll just call her Echo. I can't use the A name.
Okay. Yes.
Yeah, she's back there. She'd chime in. She really caters to all aspects of my life because I know it's kind of now old school technology using this AI automated personal assistant, but I've implemented her in every aspect of she turns on my lights, she turns off my lights, she tells us when it's time to go to bed, she checks on my kids, she manages my cameras, she has my schedule. It's kind of frightening how closely connected she is to me, but I've become so self-reliant on how she's connected all the pieces, all the dots together for me, that sometimes the wheels start to get shaky. Don't quite fall off, but they get a little shaky if she's not around and she's not working. One time the password reset and I couldn't access all my, I was like, how am I going to turn off my light?
What's a light switch?
Where's the light switch? How does that work? So yeah, my favorite technology. Yep.
It is. It's amazing. We're living through some really special times. I mean, talk about revolutions. This digital revolution is significant, and it's I don't know if you all have tried Chat GPT yet. I tried it this week, and it's crazy, like crazy. Still not completely done, not perfect, just like everything else in the world. Not perfect, but pretty revolutionary, and it's taken off. So. I'd like to jump to our last question of the day, and this could be something that's personal. It could be something, work related again, but something that's blown your mind, okay, and just changed the way you look at things. And I'll give you a quick example because this hit me 5 years ago with a conversation with my dad. My dad's been gone now 5 years, and it was 2 weeks before he passed, and he said to me, "Reader," because that was the nickname he gave me. He's like, "Reader, none of us get out of here alive." And he started laughing. And it was at that moment that actually changed the way I looked at my whole life, because we don't get out of here alive. It's not infinite. It's a finite journey we have. And so I really started changing things, and it changed my whole perspective. And that little silly thing just blew my mind at that moment. There's been tons of others. And on these episodes, Liz and I our mind's been blown a lot. But Karen, let's start with you. What's blown your mind?
Well, our dads probably would have got along very well. My dad's been gone about 5 years as well, but same kind of concept. He always said, look around the world around you and ask a lot of questions because it changes so fast, and you really have to absorb every second. And so that's probably what blows my mind every day is how fast the world around us changes. And even from the time when I was younger, getting that advice from my dad until just the last 20 years, 15, 20 years, is just how rapidly everything is moving. Not necessarily, we've been talking about supply chain, but when we look at how consumers are driving every industry, just to move at this amazing rapid pace, and how quickly the industry is now able to respond is just makes your head spin. Obviously, a lot of technologies enabled this. We talked about no code AI, that you can just copy paste and into businesses trying to pull us into the metaverse, all being really kind of driven by the consumer. When I apply that to how it's, applying to supply chain, we look at consumers pulling industry now saying, show me when my food was made at the restaurant, where it sits in the Uber, when it got packed up, when it's 3 miles from my house, 2 miles from my house. And I'm tracking my hot dogs, like all the way to my front door. I don't eat hot dogs. I don't know why I use that. Anyways, but that same evolution of what's happening now that I'm in this space, because I told you I've jumped around industries, but I'm here and I'm like, holy cow, it's like that speed in which consumers will begin to pull and say, I want to be able to look at the back of my product and know where that strawberry was harvested and when it was cooled and when it made, and was it organic and did it come here, et cetera. That blows my mind how quickly this is all happening.
Wow. Very cool. Joan?
Well, I'm going to share a couple of things. So I like to take different little sayings and really think about them. So it's like, Reed, when you were sharing what your dad said to you. So one that just always comes into my head is the saying, it doesn't get any easier, you just get faster, by Greg LeMond, the cyclist. Right. And so it just makes me think, like, not only when I'm out training and I'm like, oh my gosh, this is so hard, but I'm like, wow, I'm just a lot faster than I was like 6 months ago. And it's the same, we can apply it to the industry, right? You know, it may not get easier for us, but we're going to like learn so much, and we're going to get better at what we do. And we're going to always have challenges that come up. And so just continue to be like, hey, it may never get easier, but we're going to have solved some really big problems, and we'll have other problems that come up. I mean, we're in it for the long haul, right? And that's what I think for me personally makes working in this industry and my job really fun, is because there's always these challenges that come up. And the other thing I'll mention is when you were mentioning, Reed, about OpenAI's ChatGPT, like that just blows my mind, right? That is just something I think is a huge game changer. And it was really interesting for me over the holidays. I was at my husband's family gathering, and the one college student, you know, pulls out his laptop, of course, and like showing it to us and was like asking questions, and, you know, it's writing and giving these answers. And I was like, this is just really fascinating. Like if I was in, you know, my first year in college many years ago, I won't say when that was, like, and we had that, like, oh my gosh, right? So to see it, you know, as, you know, first year college student showing this and his excitement about it, and just thinking where this can take us. And then somebody like him who's just like, you know, in college and will soon be starting his career. It's just massively exciting to see where that's going to help us in terms of, again, maybe going faster in terms of being able to solve some of the problems we're sitting with today.
Yeah, no, it's so true. I mean, I won't take you back to the Dewey Decimal System and the punch cards that we used in college, but
there is no excuse for a B. It's straight A's across the board. There's no excuses.
I know.
Well, we can't thank you enough for being on the show today and just sharing some things with us. And, you know, 35.5 months, I wrote that down. I mean, those numbers kind of stick. It really crystallizes and makes it simple, and you need to kind of work backwards from there. You know, the rule is declared. Read it, collaborate on it. Harvesters and packers. And, you know, Karen, you mentioned FSVP, you know, go to that team or folks that have done that, ask them about the best practices, what they learn. I think that's great advice. You know, don't assume, you know, network focused approach, and standards help. They reduce costs, and they increase efficiencies, and they enable automation. You know, so this was great stuff. I want to thank you both again, you know, from Liz and I, and we will see you out there in the trenches helping folks out.
Thanks so much. It's been a lot of fun.
Thank you for joining the Next Level Supply Chain with GS1 US. If you enjoyed today's show, you can subscribe to our feed or explore more great episodes wherever you get your podcasts. Don't forget to share and follow us on social media. Thanks again, and we'll see you next time.
Hi again, this is Reed. I just wanted to take a quick moment here to dedicate this podcast to my parents. You may have noticed that I talked about my dad in this podcast, but I also threw my mom's name in there when we were talking about Joan's competition, and maybe she had to go up against a fierce competitor like Ann Jackson. Both of my parents have passed. My father passed 5 years ago, and my mother passed just a few months ago. But I can't thank them enough for all they did for me, and I'm sure many of us feel that way. And it was just a unique, organic thing that happened today in the podcast that both of them came into mind, and I used them. So just want to take this opportunity to thank them for everything they've done for me and my siblings, and just for all of us to maybe just take a moment and thank our parents, whether they're here or not here, and reach out to them, because as we all know, there's a lot of effort that went into all of us to get us to where we are today. So thanks, Mom and Dad.